Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life, the podcast. You're listening to Author's Corner, where we highlight and showcase our local authors. Today, I am speaking to Michael M. Starr, author of Journey into Peace. And Michael and I are going to be talking on the topic, understanding and using the three types of language. Welcome, Michael.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for this opportunity, Myra.
You're very welcome. All right. So let me give you guys a brief introduction. Mike Starr managed a successful $100 million a year manufacturing business. He is an avid adventurer who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and canoed 54 days from Pittsburgh to New Orleans. He's an executive life coach, former nuclear trained submarine officer, and seasoned problem solver. Mike empowered dozens of business improvement teams with one simple question: to clearly identify obstacles and implement lasting solutions. Mike is the author of the book, Journey into Peace, A Language for Peace, Progress, and Healing. The premise of the book is that everyday language we use is woven into self-fulfilling prophecies that can either hurt or help us. He discovered a new language called wise, empowering language that promotes or making peace with the past, progress in the future, and living today free of guilt or resentment. All this within a way of living called Betherism. Love it, love it, love it. All right, Mike, so let's dive right in and start with our topic. What are some examples of everyday language we use that can turn into self-fulfilling properties that can potentially hurt us?
Yeah, well, just a little bit of background on the fact that our language impacts our thinking. We use language for communication and thinking. And as our thinking changes, either gets better or gets worse, it improves or makes worse our perception of reality. So if our perception of reality improves, we respond to it with better decisions, better reactions. We get better outcomes, not only for ourselves, but in our relationships with others. With dangerous and tyrannical language, which is one of the categories I talk about at length in the book, it actually can derail us or actually create harm in relationships, not only with other people, but with ourselves. One example of that would, if we use the language of, say, I call it the language of victimhood, is you made me do this, or this made me do this, where we give up our personal, empowerment and responsibility and says, well, I got angry because you made me do this. One of the other categories, and it's unfortunate that in our culture today, we've become as divisive as we have. There is this tendency towards contra-identities where people identify themselves in opposition to others. I'm good because you're bad. I'm smart because you're stupid. And that seems to be at least from when I was a young kid, which was way before you were born, that seems to be a growing tendency, is these contra-identities. And at the heart of that are these labels that people have. You are deplorable, you are a libtard, you are a anti-vaxxer, you are unfriendly, you're stupid. Even to a large degree, you are a racist. And one of the stories of a hero of mine is about Daryl Davis. I admire him. He's probably in my top 3 or 4 heroes in life. Daryl Davis is a black R&B musician who grew up in the northeast part of the United States. And as a young boy, he, at one point in time, was leading the parade in his Boy Scouts group, and people were throwing things at him, and he didn't understand. And he came home, and his parents, which were apparently very mature people, had explained to him that people have these ways of dealing with other people who are different than them. And that began his really lifelong question of, how could people hate me who don't even know me? And at one point in time, as he was an accomplished R&B musician, and he'd actually played with Jerry Lee Lewis and quite a few folks, he decided he was going to find a way to befriend the head of the Ku Klux Klan in Maryland. His name was Roger Kelly, and he was the Grand Dragon Master. And he arranged an arrangement where Roger didn't know who he was, didn't know he was black, and they began a communication. As the months progressed, they became acquaintances. He would have Roger over his house for dinner. Eventually, Roger had him over his house for dinner, and they invited Darrell to KKK rallies with the burning cross and all that crazy stuff that went on. But in his effort to understand, he sought to ask questions, and he listened respectfully. Why do you feel this way? What is it that has brought you to feel the way you do? And he did that. And the end of this beautiful story, I think, is that through not categorizing these people as racist, evil demons, which their behavior in many ways you could say justifies that viewpoint, as people who have a view that is hard to understand. When it was all said and done, he had convinced or got people to convince themselves over 200 Klansmen to disavow their membership with the KKK. And even Roger Kelly, who became the Imperial Wizard, which was, I guess, big hoop-de-doo in the KKK nationally, he disavowed his membership and gave his robe to Darrell, who he uses it in his TED Talks that he's given. So this dangerous language of labeling people tends to put people in an either or. It's just like it's either you're all bad, you're all good. And that can really harm our ability to be. Because in the end, what do we want to do? We want to influence people in a healthy way, and we want to have healthy relationships.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I love that. Because yes, you would think that the people that are in the Ku Klux Klan are racist because that's what they're doing. They are in an organization that that targets someone else, whether it's black or whatever. But a lot of times, I guess if you were not to label them or not to make a prejudgment, then I guess then it will work out. So that's pretty good.
There's they are the quintessential definition of racism, but right. What is the goal? What is the aim for Darrell? His aim was to understand and influence. So if you're interested in understanding and influence rather than, being self-righteous and saying, you're bad, then I have a whole chapter about relationship listening. You listen to try to understand why people think the way you do. And in the end, he influenced all these people to have an entirely different point of view. Because when we label people, we often dehumanize them. And when we dehumanize them, that's it. Communications are done.
Yeah. Well, that's a powerful analogy or story about, the bad things of language and labeling people. Because yes, it's labeling is pretty bad. All right. So you mentioned a couple of languages there. All right. One type of language a minute ago. So expand on what you say there's 3 types of language in your book.
Well, I've kind of divided language, at least language related to relationships, language related to achieving healthy outcomes, language related to basically finding more peace, progress, and healing in our lives. And those categories are dangerous, tyrannical language, which we just spoke to, useless language, where we use words that just have us going round and round on the carousel to nowhere. It's that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and hoping to get different results. And surprisingly enough, and I have a whole chapter on this one, it's rather controversial, is that forgiveness is not a word, a verb of action. It may be an outcome that we achieve, but you cannot make real significant progress by saying, I'm forgiving. There's another vehicle to that, which comes through understanding, comes through compassion. But forgiveness is a useless word, just like patience is a useless word, just like, sometimes, let me see, is it willpower is another useless word, is saying I'm going to use willpower.
Right.
And then the last category is the wise, empowering language. And that's language that we can use to get the peace, progress, and healing that we desire and deserve, to improve our relationship with other people, most importantly, to improve our relationship with ourselves, because at the heart of a lot of the difficulties in many of our lives is our relationship with ourselves, and improve our relationship with the world. I'm very active in Al-Anon, which is an assistance to families of alcoholics. I'm fairly active in NAMI, which is a National Association for Mental Illness, and working with families who have members who are schizophrenic, bipolar, depressive, etc. So I feel like I'm fairly grounded in the reality of dealing with substance abuse, mental health issues, as well as the thousands of people who've worked for me over the years, in finding that wise, empowering language can make a huge difference. It humanizes us. It gives us a responsibility and the empowerment to know that if it's to be, it's up to me. I can make it happen. And at the heart of that, I have a couple of words. One is newt, the natural order things that, given the circumstances of someone's life, their birth order, their geography, their religion, their era, everything that they were brought up with their DNA, it was inevitable that they became who they became. Just as it was inevitable that those racist people became the Ku Klux Klan members, just as inevitable as somebody who maybe in the Middle East grew up learning to hate somebody of another ethnicity. It was inevitable that they would have those kind of feelings. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean agree with it, but it allows us to diffuse the emotion and the drama. And we see things as the natural order things. We can now begin to do what I call the EBC symbiotic 3. We could have empathy, we could have boundaries, and we could have the consequences in dealing with behaviors or situations that are toxic, and do it without anger, to do it without drama, just to do it. Also included in my empowering language, I have another word, lear, legitimate empowering alter realities. In many cases, there are different realities. There's not just one reality. You know, you could look at somebody as unfriendly, like our dog Rippy when we got him. He's a Chihuahua. And I told my wife, it's the most unfriendly dog we've ever had. And then I thought about it. I says, you know what, Karen, maybe he's just fearful. Maybe it's baked into his DNA. Maybe he was abused before we got here. So if I view him as fearful and previously abused, I treat him differently than if I say he's unfriendly. And I'm a little bit kinder with him, a little bit more patient with him. I'm a little bit calmer with it. So the words that we use to define the reality around us can make the difference between harmony and hatred, the difference between success and failure, the difference between peace and despair.
Yeah, I get that. So I love that. I love your analogy as well as, we're talking about, some deep subjects here, racism and the Ku Klux Klan and, terrorists in Afghanistan. But I think what you're saying in your book is that if we can use language that helps, that helps us move towards peace, progress, and healing by labeling them differently, by being understanding of, I heard a story once where someone was talking about the pirates that would, kill and murder people. And someone was saying that they were born to do that, just like what you're saying. They were born in this particular part of the world where becoming a pirate is how they survived, right? So, so give us an example. Someone that's listening, will take it down to the brass tack levels. They're dealing with someone at work. How would they use that information that you've just talked about as a language for peace?
Well, let's take the example of a boss who is maybe abusive or short-tempered or behaving in a way that we find undesirable. It begins with empathy. I actually have a whole worksheet about this. It's on my webpage, and I call it Be the Archaeologist, which means dig into. So what you do is the exercise would be about, and let's just say the boss's name is, I don't know, Joe Blow. His name is Joe, or Mary. It doesn't matter. And let's just say that he doesn't want to give us the time of day. He's not interested in our ideas. Cuts us short. So we try to understand. We work to understand, why did he become this way, and don't make it about you. Okay, so he's short-tempered. Is that his tendency? Maybe he's insecure. Does he have family problems? Does he have, was he passed over at some point in time? Because basically people are, I don't like to use the term, but basically people are jerks. There's a reason why they act that way. And so you try to understand what is behind all of that. What brought him to be that kind of person that he is? Because he's probably that way with a lot of other people, not just me. And then what you do is you start to look at, okay, how can I build my relationship with him? You know, there's a book called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help by Javier Amador, who is a noted psychotherapist, and he talks about his brother who was a schizophrenic, and he wanted to learn how he could influence his brother, and he learned that the best way is through listening and what he calls reflective listening. So find ways to listen to that person. Try to understand them. Try to understand the way they are, and speak to them using the Platon rule, which says treat other people the way they wish to be treated. Use the language that they are comfortable with. You know, as you look into these various personality tests, some people are directors, and some people are socializers, and some people are thinkers. And, you know, try to understand what kind of language best suits that individual and use that. So instead of categorize them as a jerk and a lost cause, you're trying to understand how, as we spoke before, how could I be effective in communicating with this person, and work out maybe common interests and common grounds and use a language that they use. Now, if the person is, let's say that they are, for lack of a better word, really almost criminal in their behavior, like if they're doing something just really, really wrong, like maybe stealing money or lying about people and all those type of things. So then you have a decision to make. Do I really want to work for this person? You know, and sometimes you have to make the hard decision. Is time to move on. I talk a lot about making these hard decisions, and that in most cases it's unnecessary. I believe that the vast majority of divorces are unnecessary. And when you look at the impact of a divorce financially, emotionally, on the children of children involved, it is like a huge impact. If we could prevent 75% of divorces, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing for the world at large? So my advice would be empathy, understanding best you can why they are the way they are, finding a common language, speak to them with their language, and then set some boundaries. If there's some cases where they're doing things that are totally unacceptable, have a boundary. But the boundary is not so much about telling other people what they need to do. It's about what you're going to do when they do something. A lot of people think a boundary is like, okay, I'll tell you, I want you to do ABC and you will obey. It doesn't work that way. So you can mention it to them, but when they cross the boundary, maybe they're using a language that is offensive to your religious thoughts. Maybe they are calling you out in public in an unprofessional way. Have thought out ahead of time, this is what I'm going to do about that. So if they're calling me out in public and making unfair accusations, I'm going to expect and request a meeting with them. And I'm going to maybe document that meeting. And maybe after a while, I'm going to send my documentation to HR, and I'm going to build my case. So you're not a victim. There's a lot of things you can do, but let's first go for empathy and building relationships, and then later on with the empathy, boundaries, and compassion. And I found it really, really effective. I mean, it's, if I could just give you one more example. When I came to Houston as a plant manager many years ago, once again, before you were born, I had been transferred there from Los Angeles. And I'd been there a few months, and the assistant head of the machinist unit approached me out in the shop, and he says to me, "Hey, Mike Starr, you think you're doing a good job?" And I was like, "I think I am." He says, "Well, I think you're effing everything up, and you're doing a terrible job, and I think you're stupid and screwed up, and we had everything going good till you arrived." So I was a seasoned manager at that time, and so I labeled his behavior not as belligerent, not as attack, but as a cry for help. He was crying for help. He was in pain. So I said, "Hey, Mario, why do you feel this way?" He says, A, B, C, all three. I said, "Well, A is company policy. I can't help it. B is an idea I've used before. It's effective. We have the worst safety record of any facility on the system, so I think it's worth giving a shot. And C, that's really not even in the cards. What else, Mario? What other concerns do you have?" And so I saw this cry for help. I labeled him as a person in pain. Do you know, in the 7 years that followed, we were close allies. We helped do so many things in that facility because union and management worked together as a team. So there's ways to take a belligerent or conflicting behavior and turn it into a team approach and be successful.
I like that. I think what you did as well is you showed him respect and you listened to what he was talking about. Most people would respond in anger. So that's what you're teaching, to respond with understanding and empathy. That's amazing. And that's how you bring down a level of conflict, by just not taking it personally, by understanding. Exactly. And it's a cry for help. But who would not take it personally when you said, "You've screwed up everything since you've gotten here"? Most people react, and yes, it takes a high quality human being not to react. So that's amazing.
All right. Yeah, I think you have to be friends with yourself and be at peace with yourself and know that your well thought out direction is to seek win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, confidence, and know that you're not screwing everything up. Because if you actually believe that, that's when you're going to respond.
Hey, you might be screwing everything up and use an opportunity to get better. Be open to that too.
Yeah, that's right. Constructive criticism, right? But that was not constructive. All right. So tell us about your book. Your book is called Journey into Peace, A Language for Peace and Progress. Peace, Progress, and Healing. What was the reason for writing the book? And what do you want readers to walk away with after finishing?
A little bit over 25 years ago, probably now going on 30 years ago, we had a pretty substantial family crisis going on in the middle of our family. And I was in Houston at the time. And parallel with that, I was working for not the best person in the world to work for, to say the very least, as far as ethics and behavior. So my job was really just very, very stressful, and I was dealing with a tyrant, to be honest with you. And I began, fortunately, and I don't know why I became this kind of person, when bad things happen to me, I almost always ask the question, what can I learn from this? How can I become better as a result of this? So, and given the fact that I was seeing as much suffering going on with coworkers, with substance abuse, with family problems, with financial problems, I was committed, and I became sort of like on a crusade, a mission to find out, how can we reduce suffering? How can we reduce suffering? And I came to two conclusions. The first was kind of simple. It was like, we are our own worst enemies. We create a lot of our own problems, but we are also our own best allies. We can create a lot of our own solutions. But the second one took years to discover, is that the very language we have impacts our thinking. We have these self-fulfilling prophecies. We keep talking about forgiveness. We're going to go nowhere. If we talk about understanding and building from that understanding, we're going to make progress. If we categorize somebody as a lost cause, like he's a stupid jerk, we go nowhere. If we say, this person seems real insecure and probably really afraid inside, what can I do to alleviate their concerns? And so that quest went on for quite a while. And by 10 years ago, in earnest, I began writing my book, which got published in December 10 years later, as a means to make my contribution to the world on what I think we could do to reduce suffering and what I call betterism, to live a life where we're seeking more good and less bad through personal responsibility. We have more happiness, better harmony, more success, more better outcomes, less despair, less anger, less fear, and that's all through the philosophy of betterism, of seeking win-win and seeing that the outcomes that we hope to achieve are really part of an integrated journey and destination. I climb Mount Kilimanjaro. That's a destination, get to the peak. What was the journey? It was a year preparation of getting ready for Kilimanjaro, going to the doctors, find I had a double hernia, walking 20 miles a week, ordering all the right equipment, talking to everybody, proper diets, etc. And what's really important is that the journey be a healthy journey and that the destination is a wise destination, that we maintain our relationships, that we maintain our health, and we maintain our finances. There's a saying that says, I've climbed the ladder of success only to reach the top and realize my ladder was against the wrong wall. Wrong conclusion. The better conclusion is, I chose an outcome, I chose a destination, but along the way, I didn't do it with integrity, or I didn't do it in a healthy way. I neglected my relationships. I neglected my health and finances. Hemingway, great author, admire the daily thought.
So what you're saying is that the ladder was not against the wrong wall. It's just you didn't climb it properly. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's succinct. Just like Hemingway. Hemingway ended up killing himself. So what was it about achieving being a great author that he missed along the way? So yeah, it's about how you do climb that wall and to do it with integrity, healthy relationships.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Well, listen, I love your language of betterism. This was a short interview, but what I'm walking away with, and I hope the listening audience walks away with the same thing, is that we can always make our lives better and the people that we come into contact better if we stop reacting. And I love what you opened with about, assuming that someone in the KKK is evil. That's a great assumption to make, and most people wouldn't fault you for making that assumption. But if you get to understand, what's behind it, then you can actually make a change and make this world a better place. So betterism, I absolutely love that. I love your work, Michael, and I'm glad you're trying to make the world a better place with your work. So tell our audience how they can pick up a copy of your book and maybe your website, and how they can continue to be in contact.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Myrna. I don't know you, but I love you. I've watched some of your interviews. You're a fantastic individual, and I love your background and how you have become a self-made woman. The book's on Amazon. You could get it as a paperback or a ebook, Journey into Peace by Michael M. Starr. And my website is executivecoachingservices.net, executivecoachingservices.net. And you could see if there's anything there that might be a good fit for you. And I do want to thank you for this tremendous honor and opportunity, Myrna, to be on your show here.
You're very welcome. Listen, I hand select my my guests for the content that they bring to my listening audience. So I learn something every time I sit down and have a conversation with someone, and I'm, I make the intention that the content will help someone else, not just someone, thousands of people. So yes, Michael, this was great, and we started off talking about your personal your development as climbing up. I've read a few books about climbing Mount Everest, and I have a deep appreciation for what it takes to climb a mountain. So I'm glad that you highlighted that because it's quite an accomplishment. All right, guys. So listen, a transcript of my conversation with Michael would be on the show page, which is myhelps.us. I would also link out to his book and his website. Yes. And do you have any social media handles, Michael, that you want to leave?
Just Facebook, Michael Starr.
Okay. So your name. Okay. All right. So I would also link out to his Facebook page if you want to follow him and continue learning from this incredible individual and his, what he's teaching on language and betterism. So thank you guys for tuning in to this week's episode of Author's Corner. Go pick up a copy of Michael's book. Follow him on social media, and he's an executive coach. If you need coaching to take you to the next level, he's available to do that. All right, Michael, any last words before we wrap up?
Thank you. It's an honor.
You're very welcome. All right, guys, well, listen, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, namaste.
Namaste.